All right, welcome back, everyone. This is a continuation from the first video where we talked about the syllabus. And in this video, what I'm doing is I'm starting to introduce you to literary theory and the schools of criticism. Now, you'll notice under the first module in Canvas that there is a file called Schools of Criticism Bible, and it's probably helpful for you to open that file up and move through it or move through the first few pages with me. We won't be getting too far, but the first 9 or so pages are just kind of introductory material walking you through the different types of criticism that are important as we are moving through this course and as we're trying to understand the Bible. First one in the list is going to be biblical criticism. If you are religious in nature, if you are pursuing a life in religious studies, biblical criticism is going to be very important to you. That is an approach that I took in graduate school when I went to study theology. It's one that just kind of comes naturally to me now through practice and through discipline. It does not come naturally to most people, particularly here in America, where there is a greater emphasis on the individual interpretation and on a devotional, what's called a devotional criticism, where you're looking for like spiritual truths that are true, across time. Biblical criticism does not take that approach. It tends to look at the socio-historical and the literary expressions and contexts and idioms and usage of patterns and intercalations, and is in a way something that I'm going to try and incorporate as we're moving through our study in this class. But it's important for us to distinguish what we're doing with this class. We are not doing biblical criticism and we are not doing historical criticism. The historical criticism I leave to your textbook, to Harris, who I think does a great job, great introductory textbook on trying to understand the historical importance of the scenes and the stories that are discussed in the Bible. However, Harris tries to kind of take a hands-off approach in terms of spirituality, in terms of that devotional experience that is probably most familiar or is familiar to most of you, especially if you've grown up in a religious community like a church or a religious family. Historical criticism is probably one of my favorite schools of criticism, not just with the Bible, but with all forms of literature. If you were to take my American Lit class, what you would see is, pretty much week after week, I get the students to read a short story, and then I say, well, this is kind of the context, the situation that the author was writing out of. This is what they were responding to with their stories or their essays. So historical criticism, again, is just one of those things that you really have to kind of dig in and understand the context, understand what was happening as the text, as the document was being written, and some of the assumptions that are being made. And Harris does a really good job of introducing you to that. Next, we come to literary criticism, or what is often called narrative criticism. You'll see that kind of mentioned a few times in these introductory pages. And that is what we're doing in this class, is we are not looking at the Bible as a religious text. That is important, and I don't want to, I don't want to be silly here and say that we're not approaching the Bible for religious reasons because it's a sacred text. Like, to try and say that we're not doing that, I think would be a laughable approach. We are. What we are trying to do, though, is we're not going to give that primacy. Again, that spiritual and devotional reading. What we want to do is we want to say that is important, and we're going to try and read this in a new way, and we're going to try and use the tools that are true of any text, religious or not. If it was Jane Austen, if it was Karl Marx, if it was Olivia Blake, if it was anything that you read in the middle of the night on your Kindle, romance novels, you would use the same tools that are being discussed here in this class that you would with the Bible. And we want to use those tools and utilize those tools to better understand the Bible for literary and for narrative purposes. So you see some introductory comments. I'm scrolling through the file myself. I want you to go to the bottom of page 10. So we're on the bottom of page 10. Again, if you have not opened up the file, you may want to pause the video now, open up the file, Schools of Criticism - Bible, and then join us at the bottom of page 10. At the bottom of page 10, you're going to see this timeline, and you'll see that most of these will overlap. You're going to see that in the weeks ahead, that these schools of criticism often complement and interlay with one another. They will overlap with one another. We want to be, before we do that, we want to be very attentive to the concerns of each individual school of criticism. And I want to start us off with this video by talking about moral criticism. Don't worry, if you're opening up the file, it's 36 pages. This will carry us through the next several weeks. You are not expected to sit down with a cup of coffee and read all 36 pages of this in addition to your textbook. We're going to be working through this file, Schools of Criticism Bible. We're going to be working through this file in the weeks ahead. And with this video, we're just starting out with moral criticism. Now you see in these notes that I'm introducing you to Plato's Republic, and if you, it's pretty rare, but maybe you read the Republic in high school. Again, that's kind of rare. If you did not read it, let me give you a flyover introduction to what is in the Republic. There are three fathers of Western philosophy, and Plato is probably the most important one. He's the first and most important. He lays down several concepts about logical fallacies, how a thing can be true just by inductive and deductive reasoning, just kind of how you can get to a conclusion, how you can arrive at something on the basis of logic and reason and evidence, and kind of walking you through that. And in his essay, in his lecture, is more accurate, on the Republic, he is talking about an ideal government. And in the midst of all of these things that he's saying about an ideal government, he says some things that for most of us would be common sense. Primarily because we've heard it, the influence of Plato is so strong that it's ubiquitous. We don't often go back to Plato and dig into it because it's just so much a part of our culture that we're not even aware that he's the guy that said it first and best. One of the things that he talks about in terms of an ideal government is that the person in charge of things, you want to be a philosopher king. And he doesn't mean he himself as a philosopher should be in charge. What he means is that the person that you want in charge is the person who is able to kind of think through what they're saying, and they have the most experience. An example that he uses is that you would not want a general who has never been to war. You would not want someone in charge of an army who has no experience in warcraft, or who has not had to live through those experiences themselves. Otherwise, what you have is someone who is thousands of miles away, who is making decisions for hundreds of lives, and they've not lived through it. They don't even know what they're doing. You don't want that person. And you want someone who has kind of lived through it, who has thought through it, who has thought thoroughly through it, and is able to kind of know what they're going to decide and what the implications of their decisions are going to be. Again, common sense. Most of us would approach this and we would say, or we would hear this and we would say, yeah, no joke, like everyone can agree with that. Yes. However, in the midst of all this common sense that he is putting down about an ideal government, he says some things that are curious and raise our awareness on the role of morality in shaping a society. And one of the things that he talks about, and it's a little bit nutty, so just kind of go with me on this, is that he says that there are certain instruments that play sad notes. What are some musical instruments that play sad notes? The violin, the guitar, the piano. Great, good examples. And he says that these instruments should be forbidden. And if a musician will play these instruments, they should be jailed. And if they continue to do it, even after they've been jailed, they should ultimately be executed. Which seems like a pretty big jump. I mean, if you're playing the violin, you should be executed? That's a big jump, dude. Like, where are you getting that from? Well, what he's saying is that the reason why you would do this is because if you are a musician, and presumably you are good at what you're doing, you are going to inevitably play a sad note. If you put a sad note next to another sad note, it makes for a sad song. And musicians don't just play things into a void where no one hears it. Musicians play music so that it can be heard. Well, Plato says it's only a matter of time before people will hear this and then they will be sad. And if people hear it and get sad, it's only a matter of time before a child hears it and they get sad. And they won't know what to do with these feelings. And so they will become, what Plato says, they will become melancholy. They will become a depressed individual. And that's no good, because if you have a depressed person, they're going to begin to question things that are happening inside the government. They're going to take a negative approach to things, and we don't want that. They're going to be sad all the time. They're not going to contribute to the society. They're not going to contribute to the government. They're just not going to be good workers inside the government. Now, some of us would kind of step back and we go, whoa, 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 that kind of sounds like some economic language. Yes, it does. And this is one of those examples of a concept can overlay another concept, or one school of criticism can overlay another school of criticism. Right now, we want to keep our attention on the role of morality, not on the end game of what Plato is saying, but on the start of what Plato is saying. The start of what Plato is saying is this moral concept that we want to protect children. The sanctity, the purity of a child's mind and their gentle heart, we want to keep that as long as possible. Life will do that. It will corrupt their heart and their mind eventually, but you don't need to be the person who does that. Basic moral there, right? I think most of us could probably agree with that, is that you don't want to hang out with people that are walking around kicking children. Why? Because there is something sacred about childhood that we want to protect. This is a piece of morality. I would expand this a little bit further for our purposes in this class, and I would say it doesn't end with just morality. It also includes virtues, it includes ethics, it includes our spirituality, our normative and formative experiences. All of this kind of interplays together. Until today, you have experienced moral criticism yourself. Maybe you have expressed moral criticism. Maybe you have been on the receiving end of moral criticism. And when I ask students about this, like, have you seen or heard moral criticism? It's not too long before someone will raise their hands and they will say, well, my dad said I can't wear this because it will reflect poorly on the family. And I'll say, yes, good. That is a form of moral criticism. And someone else will raise their hand and they'll say, well, what about video games? Like, my parents said that there were certain video games that I couldn't play when I was younger because they were violent video games and they would make me violent. And to this I say again, yes, correct. Someone will raise their hand and they'll say, well, in my school we weren't allowed to wear certain things. Our skirts had to be a certain length, below the knee, not above the knee. And I'll say, yes, this too is a form of moral criticism. Because what we see in Plato's Republic is that it's not enough to kind of decide what the moral, what the ethic, what the virtue, what the sacred thing is. There is also an end product of that, where we are willing to do whatever it takes to protect that. Now, if I were to ask you, what would you do if you walked across campus and you saw someone hurting another individual, not a kid anymore, but just someone else? Most of you would probably say, well, I'd probably step in and try and stop them. Good. This shows that you have a form of morality. If you are one of those people that says, well, I wouldn't do anything, I'd probably record it and I'd laugh about it later, you are probably one of those people that is not moral, at least not by the standards that Plato lays down. Why is this important? Well, here's why it's important, is because when we read any text, we are approaching it with a set of morals, ethics, values, virtues that we are bringing into the text. How do I know this? Well, if you've ever read a romance novel, there's the right way to fall in love, and then there's the bad person who we know from the jump. This is a skeevy person. We don't like this person. Why? Because they're not moral, they're not ethical, they don't have values, they don't have virtues, they're not embodying those things. If we are watching an action movie, we know who is good and who is bad on the basis of what? What is the line of morality there? Very often it's the person who is doing what they have to do in the employ of their government, or in the employ or to the protection of their family, right? Again, this is an example of morality. Well, how does this apply to our text, the Bible? Well, pretty clearly. The Bible is making some moral decisions pretty early on. The first example of this is that Adam and Eve are in the garden. Everything is great. God has befriended both Adam and Eve. They're walking through the garden, and God says, okay, I want you, Adam, to participate in this work with me. I want you to go around. I want you to name the animals, and Adam does this, and it says that Adam is lonely, and God says it's not good for Adam to be lonely, and so he creates, or I should say God creates a partner for Adam. Great, love story. Well, then what's the next piece of that story? God says, well, you can do anything you want to do, just don't eat fruit from this one tree. Well, you know how the story is going to go from there, right? It's not too long before they eat the fruit from that tree, and suddenly they're thrown out of the Garden of Eden, and they have violated the moral that has been set down. And this story will perpetuate itself in multiple ways. You'll see brother turning against brother. You'll see neighbor turning against neighbor. You'll see all kinds of weird things that are taking place just in the book of Genesis because they are violating a moral that you, the reader, are assumed to possess and agree with. And as we are moving through book after book, once we get to the book of Exodus, what you have is you have an entire army that goes out, and because they are going against the people of God, they drown, and that's it. We move on. The story doesn't matter, which means those people that just drowned, their lives never mattered at all. This, I would say, is a strange thing because the Bible is saying that some lives matter and other lives don't. What? But then the Bible will later contradict itself on that same argument. It will say that all lives matter. So which one is right? That the people of God matter, that the people who are against the people of God, that they don't matter, that all people are all lives matter? This is a moral dilemma for us as readers. And not only as readers, but the more that you begin to identify with this text and kind of take on decisions about who is good and who is bad, what you see is that the good people do terrible things and the bad people are doing amazing things, and yet you're not even paying attention to that because the moral, the ethic, the value, the virtue that you yourself approach the text with, you become numb to it. You become numb to it because you've sided with people on the basis of what? Because they're like you. Because you share some identifying markers with these people, and these are the bad people, and you can't even see the good that the bad people are doing, and you can't see the bad that the good people are doing. This is something that we would want to pay attention to through the lens of moral criticism. If we hold a value, if we hold an ethic, if we hold a virtue, when does it get violated? What are the parameters of that? Now, this is not some kind of broad panorama perspective. We see this pretty early on in the Bible. We see the first 5 books of the Bible, what's called the Torah, kind of trying to piece this apart and say, well, if this thing happens, then that's okay. That's an acceptable level. But if it goes one step further, that's a bad thing. If we do things in these circumstances, permissible, not good, but permissible. When we step across this line and we're not even thinking about what we're doing, well, then that's bad. Moral criticism will infuse the entire Bible, and it's something that we want to pay attention to as readers.